Downey of the committee is not able to be here today, so I'm chairing on her behalf. And we'd like to now call this meeting to order. And I would ask the clerk to please provide a short protocol for electronic meeting participation, as well as taking the roll call. Madam Clerk.
Good morning, everyone. So I'll provide a very shortened review of the protocols for electronic meeting participation. Recorded votes are not allowed at committee meetings. The committee chair or I will call for any objections. If you have an objection, please unmute your microphone and indicate your name and objection. If no objections are stated, the motion will be deemed to be approved. Members participating electronically that need to leave the meeting, please send an email to council@peelregion.ca. If you leave the meeting, you will be marked absent for any votes thereafter. If you would like to request to speak, please raise your hand in WebEx by clicking on the raise hand icon in your participants list. The speakers list will be determined based on members who have raised their hand using the icon. For a full view of the presentation, please use the stack or side-by-side layout view. This meeting is being live streamed. In order to ensure that the meeting remains accessible to the public, the meeting will be recessed for 15 minutes in the event that the live stream is interrupted or fails. Staff will work to get the live stream up and running as soon as possible. We will now proceed to roll call. Citizen Member Awuni.
President, I'm here. Aye.
Thank you. Councillor Demerla. Citizen Member Dio.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Dillon. Okay. Councillor Downey had sent in her regrets. Chair Yanika.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Kovac.
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McFadden.
I'm here.
Thank you.
Morning.
Citizen Member Roquera.
I'm here.
Thank you. And Councillor Santos
I'm
is
here.
present. Thank you. I'm just going to circle back to Councillor Demerla. Councillor Dillon. Okay, I'll turn the meeting back over to Chair Santos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Next is the Indigenous Land Acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather and which the region of Peel operates, which is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples inhabited and cared for this land. In particular, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe Chippewa people, the land that is home to Métis, and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are the direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, give our respect to its first inhabitants. The next item of the agenda is declarations of conflicts of interest. Do any members have any declarations of conflict of interest for this meeting? Seeing none. Next item is approval of the agenda. Do any members have anything to add to the agenda for today? Seeing none, I'd like to have a motion by Chair Yanika that the agenda for the September 16th, 2020 Diversity, Equity, and Anti-Racism Committee meeting be approved. Any objections? Seeing none, that passes. The next item is 5.1, which is a delegation from the Black North Initiative and also related to item number 6.1. Let's ask the delegates from Black North Initiative to please present your delegation.
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, and good morning, everyone. Moriga here with Isaac.
Who's controlling the PowerPoint? Is that you, Murga?
No,
the PowerPoint is being controlled.
You just prompt them to
okay, excellent. First off, thank you once again for this opportunity. It's a great privilege and honor to be here to speak in front of each and every one of you. As mentioned, my name is Isaac Ololafe. I'm the chair of the Black North Homeownership Bridge Program and also the founder of Dream Legacy Foundation. And Muriga, introduce yourself.
All right. Again, a member of the Black North Initiative, as Isaac has said. I'm the Vice President for Housing Development and Homeless Services at Wood Green Community Services.
We could switch to the next slide, please. So who is Black North? So many of you may have been aware that about a year ago, Black North was formed through the leadership of Wes Hall, and with the premise of Black North providing access and bringing to attention the systemic barriers and racism faced by Black Canadians across Canada in different areas. The vision really was to change inequalities for Black communities when it comes to different areas, from housing to social, to employment, to healthcare, and other different divisions. Founded in June of 2020 with 30 influential Canadian leaders and over 500 businesses pledging to help in breaking down those barriers. Next slide. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to lead the housing committee. And the reason why we decided to focus on housing and one of those systemic barriers, because the stats have shown that there's been decades of systemic racism and that have left Black Canadians behind in the income and wealth gap. And that stats keeps on growing, especially with the pandemic. And we've seen with housing, the impact on housing, on families, and on communities. And this is why Black North really put a focus on the Homeownership Bridge program, which we'll dive in further. Next slide. And why homeownership? For the last, as long as stats can show, homeownership has been the enablement for generations of Canadians to build equity, to start business, and to support children's post-education. Just a little bit background even on myself. I grew up in Toronto, moved to Woodbridge, and I was fortunate that my parents were able to buy a property in Woodbridge almost 25 years ago. And it was a foundation even for myself to be able to go to University of Toronto and start my own business 16 years ago within the real estate space and be able to use real estate as a tool to create equity, to be able to support even my children now going into school, but also to be able to create other opportunities for other members within the community. So we've seen multiple examples of when home ownership is able to be accessible, the other ripple effects in it, like supporting education and preparing for retirement. But when it comes to the Black community, they've been left behind because of that access to that home ownership. So this is why for almost 10 months, key members of the community has come together to put together a program that really helps bridge the gap between that home ownership. The next slide. And Marida, maybe you could jump in here.
Yeah, so we will go, for the sake of time, we'll go straight into the program and what it's based on. So the program will create a fund that leverages government grants and philanthropic donations. The grant programs, for the most part, that we're leveraging come from existing programs. So we wanted to make sure that we're piggybacking on everything that is currently in existence. And that whole package will facilitate home ownership through a second mortgage. That's really the key to this part. On the left-hand side, you can see the consolidation of the various capital and dollar sources required to support the program, philanthropic donations. The federal government has an existing program, Sept, which stands for Shared Equity Mortgage Provider Program. So that, together with the CMHC dollars through the co-investment funds, should be able to get us to that requirement of 75 to 125K per unit. We are also in conversation with the province in order for them to contribute 60 to 75K. We've had a couple meetings, including with the Minister Clark, and we're hoping to get a breakthrough in that in the fall. And then finally, we're going to various municipalities and asking them to also contribute. And we are totally excited about the fact that the region of Peel has, in fact, stepped up to provide leadership in terms of, everybody is very enthusiastic, but this is the first step forward, and here is the opportunity to make it work. So Isaac and I, and on behalf of the committee, very excited about that opportunity. So we'll use the funds to bridge, obviously, the gap between an affordable mortgage and the actual real estate costs. And you can see the breakdown where we have the traditional mortgage that will be based on the income level of the family, what they would be able to support. That sits at about 230K if you're looking at a house that's worth 700,000, and then the difference then will be provided through a home ownership bridge program. Going next, how does that actually translate into the next slide, please? How does that translate into who we're actually helping? Because I think this is important. And we're going to be able to help people who are as low as 65K to go into family equity-based homeownership. We believe that also has an impact. When we take out this highly competitive part of the market from the rental market, it'll create more room for us to be able to provide lower income housing through those rental units that are left in the open market. So the three typical families, how do you get to 65? And again, this is typical of what most family compositions that work in places like the Amazon warehouse and all the lower end of the employment spectrum, lower to middle end of the lower spectrum, kind of coddle their money in order to get to the threshold we're requiring. Parent number one is a family with one child. Level of a supervisor. Dad is a supervisor. Mom has a part-time income with child benefit. It gets to 65. The second family, again, a whole different combination. Retail manager of 50 with 5, with another 15 because they have 3 kids on child benefits. And then the other one is a single father with 2 children and also living with a grandparent. And the total income put together, fairly modest individually, but when coddled together, get us to the threshold. So that's a typical profile of the kind of people that we're going to be looking at. People who have been frontline workers during the pandemic, people who work in our service economy, that range. Moving right along to the next, and this is really a walkthrough of how, for example, the first family, and it's typical of all the others, would benefit from this program. So it's a 25-year range, modeled on 25 years. Currently, if they continue to rent, they will continue to rent for 25 years at and would have spent 600K with zero equity. Scenario number 2, which is the one at the bottom, the calculation that we have based on the numbers that I gave you earlier of 230, mortgage and a difference, mean that they will at least they will have an equity of at least 700K after 25, which they can use to support the children and retirement, like Isaac was speaking about. In addition to that, some of the proceed,
Just to add to that, in terms of key partners, which is what's stated on the slide, we've been fortunate again to have key institutional partners, banks that are stepping forward, developers that are stepping forward, and of course, conversations with municipality. And we see this not only as a model that will make impact today, but generational impact. And our goal in working with Peel is to increase the number of Black families that are currently renting in Peel to turn them into home ownership, but then by turning them into home ownership, be able to allow them to reinvest back into Peel region through, as mentioned, creation of businesses, growing of wealth, and really helping the society within Peel. So we're excited to be able to have this rolled out. And we've already had a lot of Black families through different organizations that we're connected to in Peel that are excited about a program like this because they know that as a whole, Black North has been trying to roll out something this coming fall.
Thank you so much to our delegates for presenting today on this very important initiative. We normally give 5 minutes for delegations, but I think this one was important for our members to see. And we're now going to open it up to questions. I know that there is a corresponding item to this, item number 6.1, and so I'm sure that we will bring that report forward as well. But in terms of questions for delegates, Councillor McFadden, you are up first. Go ahead.
Actually, it's not a question, Madam Chair. It's the live stream isn't working on the other end, so I'm just the sound is not working. So I'd hate to think that people didn't hear the entire presentation. So I'm glad that this is recorded, but people on the other end weren't able to hear.
Councillor McFadden, thank you. We just wanted to make you aware that we did have a very short technical glitch at a certain point, but we will ensure that that sound is available when we make the video available on YouTube.
Okay, wonderful. I just thought it was such an important initiative and good job. Like, this is such wonderful news. So congratulations and thank you to the Region of Peel, who's always wonderful in supporting a great initiative like this for home ownership. So I just didn't want anybody to miss this fabulous presentation.
Thank you, Councillor McFadden. Chair Yanika, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Well, what an exciting day, Councillor McFadden. You're so right. First of all, let me thank Isaac and Mariga for their presentation. But it's amazing the power of an idea and what the Black North Initiative brought forward to us. I've really got to single out Juliet Jackson, who in early days approached me as the chair and said, Nando, there's this marvelous initiative. At the time, no government had signed on. And the gentlemen are aware, it's funny, when you're government, I may technically be your chair and CEO, but it's not a conventional corporation. I can't bind this corporation myself. I've got to come to council and say, great idea, but I think you have a great idea, and I think the team will buy into it. As the gentlemen know, this follows on the heels of the $1 billion we've committed to housing in the region of Peel. You'll recall when I was elected, and I've been at this 30 years, housing's that file that we sort of tuck in the corner and has gone there to die because our provincial and federal partners abandoned us about 15 years ago, and the municipal tax bill can't get all this housing done. So we said, are we going to walk away? Are we going to make an honest effort? Or are we going to swing for the bleachers? And council supported me and the housing committee to say, let's tack up a big number and say, we're really going to go to town, but we need provincial federal help. And here's the point I'm coming to. When council endorsed the $1 billion plan, within 6 months, the federal government, Minister Hussein, came to Brampton and gave us a $256 million commitment. And this is the beauty of this program. When we, as the local level of government, step up with our roughly 1/3, when we only collect 10% of all the taxes, forgive me, I hope it's philanthropy from our provincial federal friends, but it's also embarrassment from our provincial and federal friends that it's, boy, if they can do that down in Peel, how do we not write a check commensurate to theirs? And what I want to share with you, and it's no secret, I've mentioned it to my colleagues, right after I thanked Minister Hussein and the Prime Minister, my next call was to the Premier and Minister Clark, and I've said, no pressure, gentlemen, but I know you're coming up to an election as well. It's just obvious you will be announcing your campaign pledges in Peel, where you have such strong support. And on that day, I'm going to get your 1/3 of $1 billion. No pressure, just start budgeting for it because we expect your share. The model works, and it works very, very well. The other point that I love about this is, and this is why I give the gentleman in the initiative so much credit. As someone that surprises people, English is my second language. My first language is Italian. English is my wife's third language. We've followed that immigrant trail as well. The reason that we've done okay in life is because our parents in a different era had the ability to get into the housing market and buy a home. That's the point from which everything starts. I'm also going to relay a personal experience to you. It was 4 years ago before I was regional chairman. Very proud of my oldest son, graduated U of T, got a job, wanted to look to get a house. With the house that you see me in now, it's a very nice home, but it still has a very big mortgage. I've been for 30 years the only income in the house. Between my son and I, with his modest starting income, he could not buy a home. This is, in theory, affluent white people, and we can't do it. I was lucky enough to become regional chair. We paid off a little bit more of the mortgage. He got a better promotion. And all of a sudden, and this is my point, with my signature only and my wife's, our son could get a starter home. Very proud to say in the last 4 years, he's bought a second one and he's on his way. That is the path that we need people to follow. And that's what's so brilliant about this initiative. So if you have housing, or if you don't have housing, if you don't have a permanent fixed address, how can you thrive in community? It's just insane. And you touched upon it in the report. And it starts that path where maybe mom and dad or your family can start acquiring some equity. And in years to come, they'll follow the path that the Unica family followed, like so many others. Final point that I will make. I love to use policing as a model, and my colleagues know this. It's funny how we're in a rush to always hire new officers when we need them at $150,000 a pop when you add up what they cost in total. But we don't want to give a dollar at the front end for programs for after school kids, things like that, children in need. And the fact is, for every dollar you spend at the front end upstream, you save $6 down the road. This program is identical to that. So if anybody were to question, well, hold on, you're taking $2.5 million, that's a lot of money. My answer is, I beg your pardon, that's 50 million I save years down the road when I don't have to find more housing for people that need housing. And here we are, and it's that old analogy, and I'll stop with here, but it's biblical. We're not giving people fish anymore. We're teaching them how to fish. And we just help them with their first fishing rod.
That's correct.
It's such a brilliant initiative, with complete thanks to the Black North Initiative. And I single you out, Isaac and Maria, for what you have done, because you, not us, we're just coming along for the ride and helping as we should. But what a marvelous initiative. And I'm going to conclude by saying I've already spoken with staff. I want this to come to council next week or a following council meeting, because I want to trumpet this far and wide. It's not about our successes. Yeah. I want to, forgive the phrase again, either play on other governments' philanthropy or their shame. They can pick which one, so that they roll into the program as well. So it's a red letter day for Peel and for the Black North Initiative. All that started from the initiative that started from the community within the Black, and Juliet Jackson to say, Chair, we have to have a talk about this about 1.5 years ago. And here we are. Gentlemen, congratulations. And it's a privilege to be partnering with you. Thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chair Unica. And I think many of the members agree with everything that you just shared. And this is certainly an exciting project that's moving forward. That being said, we'd like to, I've got a comment. Yes, go ahead. I apologize for pronunciation. Moriga.
Sorry, I thought I was lowering my hand, but just to echo Isaac and Councillor Yanichi, I'm, as a person who worked for the region of Peel, I appreciate exactly the words you have given about the region of Peel stepping up in order to set an example and to ignite the contribution of others. And that point is not lost on us. And we will take it back to the committee in exactly the way you've communicated it, with us, with a tremendous appreciation of what the region of Peel has done for the program here.
Thank you so much. So I have a motion moved by Chair Unica to receive the delegation. Anyone opposed? And I think Madam Clerk will just bring forward the related item report 6.1, including the recommendations in that report. So receipt of that report and its recommendations from Councillor McFadden, if that's all right. Anyone opposed? That motion carries. Thank you so much to the delegates today and the hard work of staff in putting that report together. We're so happy and proud of this initiative. The next delegation on the agenda is 5.2 from Anuradha Verma, QTBIPOC Saga, regarding queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, community needs, and systemic discrimination in Peel. Anuradha Verma, you now have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, folks. Lovely to be in a virtual space with all of you today, and humbled to follow Black North Initiative's really great projects. And I think there's some nice tie-ins. So some of you have seen my face before. My name's Anuradha Verma. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a cis queer woman, racialized, mat-identified, a survivor, and child of immigrants. I'm humbled to be speaking with you from the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation as a non-Black, non-Indigenous, racialized individual who's benefited from settler colonialism. I honor this territory traditionally cared for by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, and Chippewa peoples. This place, which may currently refer to as Peel, holds many complexities for me as a queer person who felt forced to leave, who returned, and who is stubbornly committed to Peel as a place of brilliance. I have many, many hats that I wear in Peel community, and today I'm here as a member of QT BIPOC Saga, a grassroots gathering of queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities from across Peel. I'm here to speak about QT BIPOC community needs, including how they relate to the findings in the agenda item 6.2. I'll quickly share a little bit about QT BIPOC Saga. I'll take you back in time to January 2016. Barb Gupta and I decided that we could no longer wait for community-based organizations to recognize and act on the needs of QT BIPOC folks locally. We watched and experienced the harm perpetuated by both LGBTQ+ orgs and mainstream cis hetero organizations whose actions made clear to us that the racialized queer and trans experience was somehow less important. We witnessed how the experience of isolation takes a toll, and we knew that we had an opportunity to try something else. For over 5 years, we've held meetups for QT BIPOC folks from across the region. Virtual has been a challenge, but when we were in person, we met in community spaces that we paid for with no funding, people's homes, and more. We shared meals, laughed, vented, and daydreamed. We began in Mississauga, that's why our name says Saga in there, but quickly realized that the borders between the municipalities are actually not at all helpful for QT BIPOC folks. So we've held meetups in Brampton, had community members from Caledon attend virtually and in person, and in the virtual moment, we've even had people from outside of Peel attend, looking for the magic of a QT BIPOC specific space. Our work has included monthly meetups on the third Thursday of the month, tonight, arts-based events, panel discussions, picnics, and more. We also advocate and push for change, even though we have to remind people in power that we exist. At the last in-person Pride in the Square event in Brampton, we advocated to have no Peel police officers attend in uniform, something that reflects conversations about the serious lack of safety QT BIPOC folks feel when Peel police have been present at our events in the past 10 years. We've been largely unfunded, as our status as a grassroots group makes us ineligible for almost all funding opportunities, including local funding. Our needs have been consistent. We all need, all of us, including all of us in this virtual space, to work to eradicate racism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, ableism, and other forms of systemic oppression that have cost QT BIPOC folks the safety of the everyday. Homes, employment, health, and well-being, and a quality of life where a future is something we can finally imagine being possible. We have been ignored, silenced, invisibilized, including by the region for far too long. And this includes the 11 years that I've been doing queer and trans community work here. Today's agenda includes a presentation on the workforce census conducted by WorkTango, and the report raises some important questions for us and highlights some serious concerns. Generally speaking, and this may be difficult to hear, there's a sense in community that the region may not be the safest or most welcoming place for LGBTQ2S people generally, and QT BIPOC folks specifically. This report confirms some of those feelings while also raising some questions. Firstly, some of the numbers are a little bit unusual and not quite aligned with what we know about 2S LGBTQ communities in Peel across the province and across Canada. Point in case, the assertion that 19% of people leaders are non-binary which would suggest that the region has a dramatically higher proportion of people leaders that are non-binary, more than any other public organization that we know anywhere in Canada. This might be an opportunity to check the numbers. Secondly, the approach to asking about gender leaves something to be desired. Women can be trans or cis. Non-binary folks' descriptions of their identities may include choosing multiple gender options. And if the questions didn't quite allow for respondents to describe their identities more clearly rather than just in these three kind of boxes, we might have missed an opportunity to truly understand who works at the region and what their experiences are. Thirdly, while the representation of LGBTQ2S individuals at 11% is somewhat aligned with the general population estimates, sometimes we say about 10%, and Stats Canada recently reported that as of 2018, the underreporting is about 1 million queer and trans people in Canada. The assertion that LGBTQ2S individuals have a relatively similar DEI experience to heterosexual respondents raises some pretty serious questions. There's a missed opportunity to apply an intersectional lens when looking at the data, which would tell the region what QT BIPOC folks have been saying for years, that having this data disaggregated by race, we would actually see some very different findings. Fourthly, the findings actually mirror what we know in community. Racialized folks, especially Black and Indigenous folks, have significantly different, less positive experiences at work. Trans and non-binary folks are not only minoritized in the workplace, but also have more negative experiences. Racism, homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia, and the way that these systems intersect are present at the region as they are in community. As part of the region's work to address these issues and more, it's quite compelling that the Antiracism and Systemic Discrimination Statement's been developed and released. And just like in the work for Census report, here's an opportunity to apply an intersectional lens so that QT BIPOC folks are not left out once again. I'll just make reference to a foundational work that informed Black feminist legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw's formulation of the concept of intersectionality, which was an anthology from the early 80s called All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, But Some of Us Are Brave, edited by Gloria T. Hull, Patricia Bell Scott, and Barbara Smith. Inspired by that, we can't help but feel that both the workforce census and the anti-racism statement and general kind of conversations in field tell us all the LGBTQ2S folks are white, all the BIPOC folks are cis and straight, and QT BIPOC folks get left behind. If the region truly believes in community for life, you must all consider that QT BIPOC folks can't necessarily enjoy living here. Every month or so, another QT BIPOC person moves away from Peel. For safety, for housing affordability, for employment opportunities, for access to basic services such as healthcare, and for access to community. As for thriving, QT BIPOC folks talk about feeling quite disconnected. There's serious issues of safety in public spaces, including on transit, safety when trying to access emergency supports, including shelters, issues of safety when trying to access employment, and more. QT BIPOC folks are not getting the quality of life that we deserve, but we thrive when we support ourselves and each other despite system failures. If regional government wants to truly lead, be future-oriented and accountable, it must acknowledge that QT BIPOC folks have been left out of decisions that impact our lives. We have felt like an afterthought. One example, which some of you have heard about before, is the decision to move Pride Month without consultation. Another is to not necessarily take seriously the ways in which QT BIPOC folks, amongst many others, are calling for radical change to policing, which disproportionately impacts our communities. In the case of data collection, the region knows little to nothing about how queer and trans folks receive services, access programs and care, how they engage or don't, and more. I know that work is starting to happen. I recognize that there are some, including some folks in this virtual room here, who've been pushing for the change we need. The truth is that QT BIPOC folks have said over and over that they actually have very little faith in those in power to change, and that's why we see a lack of engagement. There's an opportunity here, and I wonder, here's the last question, I'll end up here, what will the region do to correct course? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your delegation. And we will be discussing the report. I believe that's the next item on the agenda. Do any members from the committee have any questions related to this delegation? I see none at the moment. So I have a motion from Councillor Kovac to receive the delegation. Anyone opposed? That carries. Thank you very much for coming in for your delegation and for your feedback today. Thank you, Anu. The next item on the agenda is the report section, item number 6.2, which is the Region of Peel Workforce Census. And we have a presentation by Juliet Jackson, Director of Culture and Inclusion, and also Mary Khalili, Director of Human Resources. Juliet and Mary, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. We hope to address at least one of the data points that was called out by Anuradha related to trans and non-binary. Some of the data is difficult to understand because there are percentages of percentages. So the 19%, which was removed from the version of the presentation you would have received this morning, is not of the entire leadership population. It is 19% of the 1.5% of the organization that identified as trans or non-binary. So we will be looking to make sure that the report itself provides greater clarity of those types of percentages going forward. But it's difficult to explain when we're looking at 50% of the organization responding and then looking at the different percentages that occur as we break down the percentages. And we will also be looking at greater intersectionality going forward. So I thought I would just start there. So as mentioned, I am Juliet Jackson, and I am joined by my partner in crime. I'll have you introduce yourself.
Great. Yes. Hi, I'm Mary Khalili, the Director of Human Resources for the Region of Peel. Happy to be here today.
So we're honored to have an opportunity to talk to you about our workforce census. Before we proceed, though, we really want to take this opportunity. We don't want to embarrass anybody, but we want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the tremendous and unwavering support of our executive leadership team to move the needle on diversity, equity, and inclusion in Peel. We know there's lots of work to be done, but we intentionally focused on an inside-out approach to ensure that we're looking inside of our house and dealing with our own issues to ensure that we have the right level of engagement and commitment within the organization so that as we begin to address the issues outside in the community, we can create things that are sustainable, and we can make sure that the change that occurs in the community and within our organization is lasting. So we know we have lots of work to do, but I didn't want to start the presentation without us just taking the opportunity to acknowledge that without leadership, we can't address this issue. And we're proud to acknowledge that we believe we're moving in the right direction and we do have the right leadership to help us to get there. Next slide. Or are the slides up? I can't even see the slides. Maybe it's my view.
I can't either, Juliet.
The slides are up. The slides are up. Juliet and Mary, if you could just switch your views to the stack or side by side and you'll be able to see them.
I see it now. It's up now.
I do as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So for today's agenda, we're going to be talking to you about the objective and methodology of our workforce census. We'll be sharing some of the demographic data, key findings. We're going to talk about a specific initiative called Courageous Conversations and next steps. So I'll hand over to Mary.
Great. Thank you, Juliet. Next slide, please. The region's first workforce census was conducted October 14th to November 11th, 2020. Our purpose was to gather data about our workforce to understand demographics and how diversity impacts on our employee experience. Although the census was administered during the COVID-19 pandemic, we were very pleased that 50% of our employees chose to participate. Our vendor advised us that this response rate was indeed significant enough to be a confident indicator of overall results. This data will enable the region to make meaningful and sustainable changes towards building a diverse and inclusive community, both internally and externally. Next slide, please. Okay, so demographics, here we go. Next slide. So this census was anonymous. To preserve anonymity, we only share information where there were 6 or more responses. Gender identity, here you see that 70% of census respondents identified as a woman, 28% identified as a man, 1.5% identified as non-binary or trans. There were other selections provided for this question, but responses that did not meet the anonymity threshold, so they're not shown here. When we talk of 27% of those who identify as a man are people leaders, 21% of those who identify as a woman are people leaders, and once again, 19% of those who identify as non-binary or trans are people leaders. The age graphic, I believe, is self-explanatory. Just a reminder, once again, that these percentages are reflective of 50% of our workforce who participated in the census. And that also would apply to the belief system graphic at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. 47% of our census respondents report being born outside of Canada, compared to what we know to be 52% of Peel's population, according to the 2016 Statistics Canada data. The bar graph shows a comparison of the demographic groups between the Region of Peel respondents, our employees, which are shown in dark blue, and the Region of Peel community or residents in light blue, once again, as per that 2016 census. Although there is diversity within our organization, which is demonstrated by this chart, there is still work that can be done, as can be seen in our overall BIPOC numbers. 62% of the community would identify as BIPOC versus 41% of our employees. Next slide, please. Demographic data about our people leaders in the organization showed that 54% of our people leaders were born in Canada. Once again, this is 54% of the 50% of our employees who participated in the census. When we look at race and people leaders, we see that 38% of the people leader participants identify as BIPOC and 62% identify as white. Also identified in the accompanying report, however not on this slide, 10% of our people leaders identify themselves as LGBTQ2S+. There is a lot of work underway with our diversity, equity, and inclusion recommendations to review our recruitment and promotion policies, processes, and practices. And our goal as an employer is to build a diverse workforce at all levels of our organization. Next slide, please. This slide might be a bit hard to read, but what it does, it provides you is the details of the diversity, equity, and inclusion questions that were posed in the workforce census. This data forms the employee DEI or DEI score or DEI experience. The questions included things like, my team is made up of a diverse group of people. There are opportunities for me to grow and advance my career at the Region of Peel, regardless of my background and identity, and I'm included in decisions about my work. I'm going to turn it over to Juliet to take you through some of the key findings of the census.
Thank you, Mary. So diving into the key findings, respondents identifying as non-binary or transgender reported having a less positive DEI experience than respondents identifying as gender binary.
Juliet, I think the slide needs to be advanced.
Oh, yes.
There we go. Thank you.
So this is the slide I was speaking to. I apologize. So meaning that respondents identifying as a man or a woman scored higher than respondents who identified as non-binary or trans. Respondents identifying as man have greater access to advancement opportunities. So they basically identified that men move from role to role faster than other genders in the organization. Recognizing the population numbers, this is really important to understand. The 50% that responded identified that 70% were female. So if men are moving and advancing quicker, through the opportunities that exist in this organization, we need to understand the imbalance and correct those things. So for men identifying themselves as a people leader, the roles that they identified themselves in were equal in proportion. So supervisor, manager, director, and commissioner roles. So the numbers are similar, but the pace of advancement was different. Respondents identifying as Black or Indigenous women have significantly less positive DEI experiences. These groups report incidents of internal harassment 25% more than white men and experience discrimination at 26% more than white men. 63% of all people leaders are white, and white men and women have similar sentiment around DEI. Next slide. Black and Indigenous respondents reported lower DEI sentiments compared to white respondents. They reported feeling least positive about seeing themselves reflected across the organization at every level. LGBTQ2S+ respondents have relatively similar DEI experiences to heterosexual respondents. Basically, they reported that their rate of overall DEI experience was 3% lower than heterosexual respondents, with inclusion scores being the lowest. So going back to the presentation that Anuradha provided, there could very well be a clear distinction between those who are part of this community, but are not part of the QT BIPOC community. And so looking at how we collect this data in future years, I think will be important so that we can understand the distinction of intersectionality. Respondents who are most comfortable communicating in a language other than English have similar access to advancement opportunities as respondents who are most comfortable communicating in English. Both sets of respondents have similar access to leadership positions. Respondents who are most comfortable communicating in English represented 23% of leadership positions, whereas the other respondents represent 21% of leadership positions. Next slide. So looking at other demographics, caregivers feel less positive about having equal advancement opportunities at Region of Peel. Caregivers represent 73% of respondents with an equal proportion of those respondents who identify as men and women. Respondents identifying as having a disability have lower DEI sentiment. Respondents represent 8% and identify having a disability with an equal proportion of those respondents who also identify as men and women. New immigrants have significantly higher DEI sentiment compared to immigrants who have been in Canada greater than 10 years and respondents who are born in Canada. Almost half, 40%, of the Region of Peel's respondents identified as immigrants not born in Canada. Immigrants who have been in Canada for at least 10 years noted the importance of diversity, work tasks are fairly divided, and feeling Region of Peel will respond if somebody reports discrimination and harassment. You might have questions about why that would be. Anyone who is sort of connected to the new immigration experience would have read data that would show that immigrants who have been here for greater than 10 years start to realize that maybe their hopes and dreams when they came to Canada cannot be realized. In the first 10 years, they still have hope. After 10 years has passed and they feel that they've put in their due diligence and made significant efforts to do their part to succeed, if they still aren't thriving in Canada, this is where we start to see the dissatisfaction. So this is where some of this data is coming from. Next slide. So now I would like to share with you a little bit about Courageous Conversations. Next slide, please. Courageous Conversations were started to provide a safe space for Black employees to share their feelings and experiences with our executive leadership team after the death of George Floyd. 6 sessions were held with Black employees throughout the organization. In September of 2020, the region held focused courageous conversation sessions open to all employees, covering a variety of different dimensions of diversity, including the Black community, First Nations, Métis and Inuit peoples, East and Southeast Asian people, religion and faith, accessibility and disability, South Asian people, LGBTQ2S+, gender bias, and ageism. Data was collected through the sharing of employee stories, experiences, and we also completed surveys and polling. And in essence, this became our internal consultation with staff. Next slide. Key themes coming out of Courageous Conversations, staff identified that they would like to be able to have open, personal, supportive conversations with their leaders, teams, colleagues, and have opportunities to learn about and commemorate diverse celebrations, events, and observances. Policies, processes, and practices need to support diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly in the way they are applied, which would confirm or suggest that what's written makes complete sense. How it is practiced and applied in the workforce is really the concern. There was a bias and a lack of transparency regarding recruitment, promotion, and access to learning opportunities. DEI education and training is needed at all levels of the organization, from frontline to senior leadership. There's a lack of diverse representation at all levels of the organization, particularly in leadership positions, which is so important to see yourself represented at every level of the organization. It gives hope that there's space there for you if you're interested. Accountability mechanisms must be part of all DEI efforts. Without accountability, we know that there'll be no change. Courageous Conversation data informed the DEI recommendations, which we will touch on later in the presentation. Next slide. So we also included in the accompanying report an appendices on our anti-racism statement, which we recently released. Next slide. The statement defines our organization's position, which will be supported by action and serves as an anchor to all diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion efforts. I'd like to read the statement aloud, as I want to emphasize that every word that was selected was done with intention and represents an important foundation for the culture of our organization going forward. The region of Peel recognizes the impact of historical and ongoing racism and systemic discrimination in its communities. We are committed to learning, evolving, and owning the role we have played in preserving the systems that advantage some and disadvantage others. As a municipal leader and accountable government, we accept responsibility to expose and oppose racism and dismantle the institutional systems that perpetuate social inequities. To achieve community for life, we will enact sustainable change for our employees and residents through our policies and practices that demonstrate respect and dignity for all, enabling people in Peel to achieve their fullest life. Next slide. Next slide. So I hope that as you heard that statement, that it moved you a little bit. We feel like it's powerful, and we feel like it's something that really is a promise, but an acknowledgement that as caretakers of the systems that we are responsible for, that we have a responsibility, and we're ready to confront that, I think, head on. So looking at our DEI recommendations, so for the workforce, these recommendations are for the workforce, and were developed in April of this year and endorsed by our executive leadership team. We have a phased-in implementation plan, which ranges from 2021 to 2025. The 5 key areas that basically we're focusing on as a result of what we heard and what we've learned through the results are inclusive and respectful workplace, career advancement and promotion processes, employee education, recruitment, and employee engagement. Next slide. And back to Mary. You're on
Mary,
mute.
your microphone's muted.
Thank you. I have a dog in the background, so sorry about that. So examples of our diversity, equity, and inclusion recommendations in progress, which, I will just pause to say is a challenge in the midst of the pandemic and how our resources are being drawn, but important work that needs to be prioritized. So these include the introduction of a recruitment diversity principle, whereby diverse candidates are given prime consideration when we have multiple candidates equally qualified for a role. We're also well on our way in a process of developing a diversity, equity, and inclusion learning framework for employees that will focus on topics such as conscious and unconscious bias, Indigenous history and culture, and anti-racism. Our recommendations here are not exhaustive. These are in particular aligned to the workforce, but there is additional work to be done with a focus on community. Next slide, please. I think that's Juliet. Over to you, Juliet.
So, and go to the next slide, please. So the implementation plan for phase 1 of the recommendations is being finalized. We have an employment systems review, which is a review of policies, practices, and processes related to recruitment, promotion, and pay. This was planned for earlier this year, but as a result of the pandemic had to be delayed. Once completed, will allow us to address significant pain points highlighted through courageous conversations in workforce census. So this is planned for 2022, and we will bring results back to the committee. The data we've collected will be included in the development of our DEI strategy, which will also be developed in 2022. And this will be facilitated through an external vendor. As mentioned, these recommendations are aligned to the workforce, but more will be forthcoming in alignment with our focus on community. You've heard some updates today, which represent our commitment to making sure that these changes that we experience internally have a direct impact on our community so that community for life can be realized. Next slide. Thank you very much, and we are happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Juliet and Mary, for this very, very informative and such an important presentation and work that you've been doing. Questions from members of the committee? Councillor McFadden.
Madam Chair, thank you for the presentation. It was quite in-depth and I really appreciate it. The City of Mississauga has been working on their plan for the past, I'd say, 8 years already, and it was a very complicated process. Gary Kent sat on our committee for quite some time. Now, I'd be more than happy to have you come and sit in on one of our meetings and see the progress that we've made at the City of Mississauga. I think you might be able to take some of that information back and help with the progress that you're trying to move forward on. We've hit a lot of those milestones at the City of Mississauga, but it didn't happen overnight. We did have an external person come in and help us through it because we were struggling. And it is a very difficult, you try and please everybody, and at the same time, you're not pleasing anyone. So, you have to really manage that quite carefully. And I'm very proud of the work that we've done at the city. So I would open that opportunity for you and welcome you to join in on any of our meetings, or I can send over the information that we've already been able to work on in the past 8 years, and hopefully that'll help you come further along in this progress.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor McFadden. One of the bright lights for me of the pandemic is the networking that I have with the HR people from the local municipalities. So I'm well connected with Mississauga and we'll reach out there. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I hope it helps.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Next is Member Rajbir Deo. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you for that presentation. I do think the steps that are being taken are in the right direction. I had a few reflections that I'd like to share. Before I dive into that, I just want to make one comment that kind of ties into Anuradha's presentation, and basically around like the way that we craft questions to surveys will directly impact the answers that we get. So I don't know the process that went into kind of constructing the survey, but a best practice of conducting any type of evaluation is to ensure that there is stakeholder engagement and involvement. So having like focus groups of like the LGBTQ community and asking them about the way that language is crafted in a survey. Do you approve of that? And that can help also increase engagement and buy-in to complete the survey as well. So perhaps that's just something, I don't know, an opportunity to improve for next time, or perhaps. So I'll just jump into some of my other reflections. So the Region Appeals Anti-Racism and Systemic Discrimination position statement included to expose and oppose racism and dismantle the institutional systems that perpetuate social inequities. And there was also an important point made about respect and dignity for all. So I really like the statement. It really resonates with me. I find it to be very powerful and right on. And I think it's absolutely important that we tackle any unconscious biases and apply that statement to literally everyone, as this position statement says. So I had spoken at the last meeting about this, and I'm wondering if there is any kind of update. As we deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, there is discrimination and exclusion of unvaccinated people occurring. So we are now seeing the implementation of vaccine passports, mandatory vaccine policies, and mandatory testing. Data shows that racialized people, especially Black and Indigenous people, have higher levels of vaccine hesitancy. So we are putting in so many strong efforts to tackle racism, but mandatory vaccine policies and vaccine passports and forced testing and whatnot are creating another layer of systemic discrimination that's going to disproportionately impact racialized people. So we have some serious questions to address when thinking of this from an equity, anti-racism, and anti-colonial perspective. For example, how will vaccine mandates impact Indigenous communities? Will measures support truth and reconciliation efforts? A part of diversity equity is to show trust, respect, and dignity for people to choose for themselves how they live and what they put into their bodies. Creating barriers for this small minority of people to participate in society and to earn a living will only further cause mistrust and oppression, and it does not honor the Region of Peel's position statement. I also understand that vaccine passports have come from the provincial jurisdiction, but we have impacts to our residents. For example, who is to decide that a movie theater is not essential? For some, it is. For example, there are community mental health programs where individuals with mental illness have group outings, such as to the movie theater. This is a part of their rehabilitation process and their reintegration into society. If one of these people is unvaccinated, is it fair and justified to now discriminate against them and bar them from the movie theater? Did they commit a crime or something? We are creating another level of systemic barrier for someone with a disability who is already marginalized. So there are many implications to the emerging vaccine-based discrimination and differential treatment being institutionalized. This is a nuanced and complex issue and requires holistic thinking and a sensitive and thoughtful approach. And there's also labeling of people who don't take the vaccine as anti-vaxxers. We all know, we should know better than everyone else, the dangers of stereotyping people. Some people are just scared. They don't trust the system. They're scared about unknown long-term side effects, and some just need more time. In the era of equity, it is deeply disturbing and disheartening that a culture of division, hate, and fear is being created against our fellow human beings, rather than a compassionate, rational, and empathetic approach. The same principles of inclusion and allyship that we apply to people of religious minorities, racialized people, people from the LGBTQ community, we must apply those same ideas to this minority. It's just another minority. True equity and inclusion means respecting the dignity of every single person, even when they may look, believe, or choose differently than yourself or the minority or the majority. So basically, following the motion that was passed at the last DEAR meeting, where is the region at with addressing and monitoring this serious issue? How will Peel be a leader? In alignment with Region Appeal's position statement and to hold ourselves accountable to it, how will the region ensure that all policies are assessed comprehensively through an equity and inclusion lens, and that there is no discrimination, segregation, undue hardships, and dehumanization put towards the very small minority of unvaccinated people? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rajbir, for your question. I believe Nancy Pulcinelli may have a response to provide an update on this. Nancy, if you can go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you so much for your comments. I can give you a little bit of information about what we are doing when it comes to the pandemic, to response, as well as to our vaccination program. We have spent a lot of time working with our community partners for the very reasons that you've identified. So with the use of data, with the use of our many conversations with a variety of community partners, as part of our committee that we started at the onset of vaccination, which is our Community Equity and Engagement Committee, what we've been able to do is really work with the entire region community, but more importantly, really get to the communities within the communities. So we're working with groups like our Black, Caribbean, African community, our QB, our LGBTQS2 plus communities, and various others, so that we can get to where those groups are. And we're doing it, there's two reasons. Certainly the first is to vaccinate, so through mobile clinics, through sub-community clinics, smaller clinics, we're able to tailor what those clinics could look like and should look like to support the needs of those different community groups. So they become very tailored based on what our community is telling us, and not just one community, but again, many communities. The other thing is it's an opportunity for us to build on the information they have or don't have when it comes to vaccinations in a way that makes sense to them, so that we can support those that are on the fence to be vaccinated. But our goal right now has moved away from fixed clinics so that we can get to those groups, certainly. I think that I'm not certain, Mary, if you want to add a little more when it comes to something like the vaccine policy and how do we support the community from a fourth wave or a fifth wave, and that too is part of this bigger conversation.
I wasn't going to speak directly about the vaccine policy, but the speaker's comments relative to reviewing our policies with a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, that is what the employment systems review will do, and we are looking forward to starting that in 2022.
Thank you so much, Nancy and Mary, for the response. Rajbir, is there any further questions that you may have? Go ahead, Rajbir.
Yeah, sorry. So I think basically the main question isn't truly addressed, because it's great. Like, we do need to keep, we can keep pushing the vaccine, which is great. Reach out to the marginalized groups, but there's going to be people who don't take it, right? There's going to be people who don't, and it's a tiny minority and a small shrinking minority. So there will always be people that don't take it, and creating barriers for them to go to work or participate in the community is violating diversity, equity, and inclusion, and even anti-racism principles. So how do we truly address that?
And thank you, Rajbir. I see that Dr. Lowe has joined us. Dr. Lowe, did you have any further comment?
Yeah, so thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the member for the comments. I think it's important to clarify a few important facts as I understand it from the in respect of the provincial certification at this point in time. The provincial certification system does not apply to employment. So at this point in time, it is up to individual employers to determine how and where vaccination may fit into a COVID-19 workplace safety plan, and then to determine if it is worthwhile to institute such a policy within their workplace. But the vaccine certification system does not exclude individuals who are entering these places for the purpose of employment at this time. I think it's also really important to highlight that, certainly for us at Peel Public Health and throughout the region of Peel, we are extremely committed to advancing health equity. It is one of our strategic priorities. And insofar as we talk about taking a whole and overarching view of equity, we can certainly look at questions around the impacts of vaccine policies and mandates, but it must be looked at within the overall impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic as well, and how the pandemic itself has frustrated equity. We know that new and racialized Canadians, we know that essential workers, we know that minorities of all stripes have been the people that have been worst affected by the COVID pandemic. They are the ones that end up in our hospitals. They are the ones that have been succumbing to this disease. And so insofar as vaccines scientifically have been proven to be safe and effective, and fully recognizing that there are decades of institutional mistrust and other reasons why people may not take vaccines, and that the whole group as to why people are not vaccinated at this point in time is extremely heterogeneous. It is access, it is trust, it is all sorts of other things there. That's what Commissioner Polsinelli was speaking about our constant efforts to also really ensure that people are walked beside, really ensuring that their questions and concerns are answered so that they can access that protection, knowing that the virus and the pandemic itself has also extremely frustrated equity by seeing the disparities in the outcomes, in the health outcomes that have been seen throughout the community. So I hope that it helps to provide an additional lens and to really just also clarify the fact that this does not frustrate employment either. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lowe and Commissioner Polsinelli and Mary as well, and Rishbir for your questions. Councillor Kovac, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Vice Chair, was not planning to speak today, but did want to thank Juliet and Mary for your presentation, and essentially just all of the regional staff who were involved in putting together the survey and then going forward with trying to extract what I think is vital information. To the point that the member had made earlier, Rajbir, I felt the same way when we had done a survey recently at the city. And you've got to pay kudos to those at the city for working hard and making that attempt to extrapolate information that we need. We need to have that at our disposal to see kind of who is working at the city and how we can make improvements going forward to make it a safer and more diverse space. To the points that the member had made, and I know Dr. Lowe has come on the call, and the comment about the province has, there are many businesses right now that I know are issuing an ultimatum, either get the vaccine or you face termination. So that very clearly to me is scary for all of the people who feel that they're being safe, they're taking all the necessary precautions, and yet now they're being put in a position where they are being threatened. So I'm not really sure, Dr. Lowe, how you're coming at that. There are people who are hesitant for a whole variety of reasons. The FDA just recently in the United States gave approval, very recently. The FDA has given approval to drugs that a year or two later they say, no, we got to pull that off the shelf. It causes cancer. We now know. So people are aware of that. You have people who are extreme and who are going to get, read every conspiracy theory that they read online and think that it's true. And then maybe they'll get the coverage on the media. And then you're going to start to think, oh, anybody who's unvaccinated is a crazy type or they're extreme. When in actuality, you have people who are extreme on both sides of the equation. But here we are, we've set up a diversity, equity, and anti-racism committee, and we don't see that we've now created a new kind of a subgroup of discriminated people. And I have friends who are already in minority groups, ethno-cultural, religious, sexual orientation-wise, who are discriminated against. You're telling me this is not now an extra layer added on top of that? I don't see it. Dr. Lowe, there are, since you're on the call, there's Covaxin, there's Novavax and Medicago. Can you specifically address these three vaccines and the fact that currently, we have the mRNAs that are being pushed, yet that's not the case in every other country. There are people who might just be hesitant about mRNA, which is for the masses a very new thing. Just over the last year, our mRNA is being...
Sorry, Councillor Kovac, I'm just going to interrupt very, very quickly.
Okay.
I'm just, as chair, I'm just concerned that we're kind of veering away from the report and the intention of this particular conversation right now. I know that there are added layers and complications, obviously, with COVID-19 and the various mandates and the vaccination, et cetera. But perhaps I would suggest, perhaps, Councillor, that you bring this up at the next COVID-19 update for the region at regional council, and perhaps let's just stay focused on the presentation and what Juliet and Mary presented today. I don't, because this is such a complicated issue that you're bringing up, and Rajbir as well. I don't think we're going to have the answers to that today. In fact, I don't know if we will have ongoing conversations about it. But it's 10:49 right now, and I am concerned that this is going kind of off topic. So I would recommend that perhaps you bring this up if you can at regional council. It is an important issue for sure.
Thank you. I take your points. Maybe I'll just, on an aside, ask Dr. Lowe if he would like offline to have a conversation, because I have a number of questions to ask him. Nancy, you're welcome to join as well. As in the recent past, when I have maybe raised a few things during the COVID-19 report, maybe feel like I haven't really had enough time to get that addressed. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Kovac. And would you be willing to receive the presentation? Move to receive, yes, thank you. Moved by Councillor Kovac. Anyone opposed? Thank you so much. And thank you to staff for the hard work in your presentation today. The next item is 6.3, social procurement through supply chain diversity. This is a report for information. Do any members have any questions? Okay. Moved by, if that's okay, Member Rafik Rokaria. Anyone opposed? That carries. Next is 6.4, another information report, and I believe Juliet Jackson has an update to share regarding Truth and Reconciliation update. Juliet, you have the floor.
Thank you for the opportunity. So just wanted to let everyone know that we did have an event planned for September the 30th, but now that we will not be open on that date, and we are honoring the federal holiday to reflect, we've moved our event to the day before that, which is the 29th from 9 to 12. And I believe that we've extended the invitation to council. And I know there might be some conflicts as a result, but we wanted to provide our staff, our community partners, and council, if needed, the opportunity to understand what we need to reflect on the 30th. So, the invitation is extended to you, and just wanted to make sure you're aware that we've moved the event to the 29th.
Thank you so much, Juliet, for that update. Do any members have any questions? Okay, so for information, the report to be received, motion moved by Teresa Awuni. Anyone opposed? Thank you. Moving on, section 7, communications, item 7.1 and 7.2. Correspondence from Bonnie Crombie, Mayor of City of Mississauga, regarding Mississauga's Black community engagement sessions. Anyone have any questions regarding this communications Seeing none, moved by Councillor McFadden for receipt. Anyone opposed? That carries. Next item, 7.2, communication from Corey Bernard, Director, Equity, Inclusion, Diversity, and Anti-Racism, Ontario Health, an email dated August 11th for receipt only. Moved by Member Rajbir Deo. Anyone opposed? Okay, that is received. Thank you. Oh, yes. Rajbir, go ahead. Did you have a question on the correspondence 7.2?
Yeah, I thought that was a good report, and I just want to make another comment kind of related to what I was saying before. Like mandating vaccines and vaccine passports are not alone going to solve the deep-rooted health inequities, because that doesn't get to the root. And like a multimodal approach is needed to solve health inequities, such as putting preventative measures, addressing systemic racism, and like other factors such as worker rights. So mandatory vaccines, like I've already tried to explain, will lead to exclusion of racialized people who are also suffering the most from COVID. So when they're already suffering the most from COVID, and now they're going to be prevented from earning a living and participating in society just because they're unvaccinated, they are effectively being dehumanized and segregated, and we're reinforcing the systemic barriers. So that's why I try to emphasize we need a really nuanced approach to this, and to apply those kind of anti-racism principles to this situation as well, and not subject people to like hyper-authoritarianism, because that's not in alignment with anti-racism principles. I'm just wondering if there's anything we can kind of pass, any kind of motion or anything we can bring forward to ensure that, this part of this whole thing is not really in the mainstream narrative, and it's extremely important. So is there anything we can pass, any motion to ensure that we continue to kind of look into this issue and decrease and eliminate any of the systemic barriers that this extremely small proportion of our society will fall into?
Thank you, Rajbir, for that question. I think it would be very difficult to draft a motion today on the floor, considering how complicated and how nuanced, as you've described, the issue is. And so, if there is a motion that you would like to bring forward or work on, I would suggest perhaps having a conversation with Councillor Kovac. And maybe if Councillor Kovac brings that forward as a discussion item during the COVID-19 update at Regional Council, that might be an appropriate time. But certainly I don't think today we'll be able to draft anything on the floor. So that's my recommendation in terms of on how to proceed with that suggestion. Is that okay?
I suppose.
Okay. Would you be willing to receive the report, 7.2? Move to receive the report?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rajbir. Moved by Rajbir Deo. Anyone opposed? Thank you very much. That motion carries. There's no other business. We have no in-camera items. The next meeting is still to be determined, as the 2022 council and committee schedule still needs to be approved by Regional Council, which is on September the 23rd. Next item is adjournment. I have a motion from Councillor Kovac to adjourn this meeting. Anyone opposed? Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Great conversation, important issues and questions that have been asked. Thank you to staff. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We will see you next time.